Today, we're going to talk about longboards, and more particularly, how the location of the widest point of the board's outline alters the performance and described function of the surfboard. There are three basic outlines that are more commonly seen within the longboarding community: wide point back, wide point center, or a paralleled rail design as it's sometimes referred, and wide point forward. As we understand from previous episodes of Surfing Explained, the surfboard outline can be looked at in two halves, the front and the rear. In general, we use the front half for speed, grip and stability when we engage the rail of the surfboard into the wave face, and then the rear half of the board for maneuverability and responsiveness, where we can lean our weight onto the tail and lift the nose high out of the water to disengage the rail from the wave face and pivot off the back foot to change direction. The widest point of the board is going to loosely define where the divide between those two controls sit, and how the overall speed and grip, or maneuverability and responsiveness, are either increased or decreased by affecting the outline shape of the board. Noseriding is a particularly desirable skill within longboarding, and such a skill relies on a combination of both maneuverability to manage the rider's position on the wave, and then speed and stability to maintain enough support, security and grip for the rider to move to the nose. And so we're going to use noseriding as our metric of performance when comparing these longboard outlines. So let's start at the rear with wide point back. To put wide point back into context, we're talking about surfboards like Dale Velzey's original Pig from 1955, which premiered the design, or the slightly more subtle wide point back of Nat Young's Magic Sam from 1966, or the more recent Bing Pocket Knife. On all these boards, the nose width appears more narrow than the width through the tail. That's what we mean by wide point back. Boards in the 50s were still constructed from solid wood, and so maneuvering the heavy boards was particularly challenging. Pulling the wide point of the surfboard back increases the amount of curve through the back half of the outline, making the board easier to carve through turns. By narrowing the nose and reducing the material and weight up front, the swing weight of the board through a maneuver was reduced, thus making the board more responsive. Equally, by eliminating the width of the nose, it reduces the risk of catching the outside rail, and so encouraged surfing closer to the curl where the tight diameter of the wave curve previously made this difficult. Although this all sounds positive, there is a trade-off. With the rail line naturally pulling away from the wave face and less lift from the reduced surface area up front, the rider has less support from the wave, which means that riding on the nose on slower, softer sections where the board produces less lift is more challenging. These designs therefore require a steeper wave or more technically proficient surfer to nose ride successfully. As we move the wide point further forward, closer to the midpoint of the surfboard, we end up with a more balanced outline, where the nose and tail are of a closer width. As the nose width increases, so does the stability of the surfboard when in trim. Creating more surface area to provide lift and thrust becomes particularly useful in either soft waves or when nose riding, when speed and grip are particularly important to the success of the maneuver. This is probably the most common outline we see in modern longboards, as it gives a lovely balance between maneuverability and stability on the nose. When both nose and tail widths are widened further, we see the standard outline of the classic logs of the early 1960s. More recently, the Bing Levitator is a good example of what can be described as a parallel rail surfboard, where the length of straight rail that is available to the wave face is as long as possible, and so will provide more grip and hold in a straight line. This means that with both an increase in speed up front and grip in the rails, the surfer can potentially nose ride in a greater variety of positions on the wave, and isn't limited to the more technical, steeper curve right against the curl, ultimately creating a more user-friendly surfboard and experience. The downside of wider log-style boards is that those straight rails can be hard to break out of the wave face when you want to turn. And so boards of this style often use other features such as an increased tail rocker to help the rider initiate the turn. They can also become quite hard to control in bigger, more powerful waves, when the abundant surface area can start to generate too much lift and reduce the grip. Finally, an outline that has pushed the widest part of the board forwards of the midpoint continues on from what we mentioned before about increasing lift in the front portion of the board. Surfboards like Donald Takayama's hugely popular In the Pink, or Wingnut's Nose Rider, are good examples of this. With the rail line now pulling the nose into the wave face, with a huge surface area under the nose, the rider can rely on the increase in speed, stability and support as they walk forwards on the board. This becomes particularly useful on soft waves with little to no steep face to engage the rail in, or in situations where the rider is in parallel with the wave face. When the rider is then on the rear of the board for turning, the narrow tail will help the rider roll from one rail to another more quickly, as well as making it easier to sink the tail and lift the heavy nose clear of the water. The straight rails and high swing weight make these boards better suited to more pivotal turns when compared to the carve-friendly wide point back designs. When determining which board to ride, we must consider two things. Firstly, what is my proficiency in all the skills that lead up to and include nose riding? If you have existing nose riding skills, then the wide point back outline might be a more exciting and challenging choice. Or if we are new to the more advanced longboard skills like nose riding and positioning close to the curl, then an encouraging wide point forward outline might provide a more enjoyable experience. Secondly, what are my home break's typical conditions? Are they steep curved or softer curved waves? If it is softer, then a wide point forward or parallel rail outline would suit the softer wave. Or does the wave have a steep curl where a reduced nose and wide point back would fit better in the steep curl? Decisions, decisions, decisions. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.